Hello, I'm Nathan Hansen with Nordic by Nature, and I thought I'd show you how we make our Viking shields. We actually make quite a few of them in a year, and we know that ours are a little bit more expensive than everyone else's. But I hope to show you why they are and the quality that we put in behind them. We use linden to make our shields, which is the traditional wood to make shields with. And we start out by cutting them to size and then taking them over to our jointer and putting a good straight edge onto the edge of it, and then we joint the face as well to make sure that that's nice and smooth also. And then from there we take them over to our planer to give that other face a nice and parallel surface. Once we've planed them to thickness, we take the side that wasn't jointed and we cut that off using the jointed side up against the fence of the table saw to ensure that we have a parallel board. Once we've cut off and at the table saw, we run each side through the planer again just to make sure that we're all trued up and ready to go. This makes it so that the edges of the board are 100% 90 degrees to the face of the board, makes for an easier glue up. The more time you spend on trying to make sure that everything's perfect for that glue up, the easier your glue up's going to be. When we mill our boards to the final sizes, they're actually not all the same width. So when we stack them like that, we stack them by height so that we can spread the glue on the edge a little easier. And then once we have that glue spread, we put them back into the random pattern and clamp them up. You're going to want to make sure that those clamps stay on for at least an hour or two to make sure that your glue is good and dry. Overnight is best. I then mark the center of the board, and I'll drill a 1/2 inch hole on that center mark, and you'll see why here in just a minute. I actually have a jig on the table saw that I use that center hole to make the round wheel. Here you see me cutting out the circular shape using that template. Essentially, it's just a template that has a dowel on it, And our shields are 30 inches across. So the dowel's set at 15 inches centered from the blade of the saw. So when we turn it, it makes a perfect circle. Here you see me using the router to set the bevel on the shield. Our shields are not flat. We do bevel our shields so that the center is much thicker. It's about 3/4 of an inch thick in the center, and that goes down to about 3/8 of an inch thick on the edge. The typical Viking shield would have been tapered as well. By doing this taper, when we actually put our edge on around the shield, it will actually cause the shield to flex back slightly towards the holder of the shield, rather than flexing forward, making a concave shield. So the jig I use is pretty simple. It's just has a spacer block on the end that goes on top of the shield, and it's flat on the other side, and I glue that down to the workbench. And again, here I'm using that center hole as a reference point, so that I can spin the shield underneath. Linden is pretty easy to work with. It's tough to find though, so if you go to your hardwood supplier, you're going to have to probably do a special request. We always have to request it, and they bring it in from the East Coast for us. But it's a really nice wood to work with in shield making, and it is the traditional wood to work with for shields as well. It's the same type of wood that they would have been using in the 900s to make their shields. Once we've routed the bevel on, we then take and sand it down. Now the front of the shield is actually going to be covered with our linen canvas, so we only sand that down to about a 120 grit, and we start with an 80 grit just to help remove the router marks, and then move to a 120 grit to do that. The back we'll sand a little finer. We sand that to a 220. And you'll see us sanding that here shortly. The reason for that is we leave our backs natural. A lot of people like to see the wood grain. Traditionally, the back could have also been covered with linen to help give it a little bit of strength. The strength on the shield actually comes from the wood fibers being melded together with that linen, causing a strong surface. It's really a composite lamination is what it ends up being, and then the edge banding that we use also lends quite a bit of strength to it as well. Once we've sanded it all down, we take and we mark in 3/4 of an inch from the edge, and we just do that with a combination square set to 3/4 of an inch, run a line around, and then I mark a 1-inch spacing all around that rim and drill some holes. These holes are gonna be what helps us to attach our edging to the shield, and that's a traditional method of attachment of that as well. We lace ours on. We can also nail it on. However, iron was kind of a premium, so they were typically laced on. And we tend to follow that same standard. So all in all, you're seeing about 8 hours of work compressed into about a half an hour, just on these shields. We actually spend a substantial amount of time with these. The linens that we use to cover them with are actually painted with oil paint, so we spend quite a bit of time with that as well. We have to wait for the oil paint layers to dry before we can put another layer on, and that can take up to 2 weeks. So there's a lot of processes that go into making one of our shields that are outside of actually building the shield itself. Here you see me marking out the handle for how we're going to cut it, and then take it over and do our cuts on the bandsaw, and then I'll shape it with a rasp and sand it all down again before it gets attached. Actually using something much harder for the handle than the linden is. That's a piece of oak right there. It was just a scrap piece that we had laying around in the shop. We get a lot of scraps from oak or maple, even some walnut on occasion. So we try to use those up. It wouldn't be uncommon to see a harder wood used on the handle than what the linden is. So that's what we're doing. To attach the handle, we glue it on first. it'll actually be, we have hand-forged nails that we use to attach it as well. But really, the nails at this point are more decorative than anything. That glue is going to hold that handle on there much more effectively than nails alone would. So we make sure to glue it up well, and we apply pressure not only on the ends of it, but also through the middle. And if you see when we cut our rounds, I cut a small divot for the handle, and you'll see why I didn't go all the way through here in a minute. It's just easier to deal with when it's flat, easier to clamp against, things like that. I then take and do a countersink on all the holes I drilled earlier on the drill press. This just helps keep our cordage from snapping. It's purely something that is that helps me when I go to lace it up. If you don't do this, you'll end up having your lacing snap on you every other pull, because you're trying to pull it as tight as possible, and if you leave those square edges, it just tends to do that. Okay, so this is where I take it back over to the table saw, and we're going to cut out the hole for the hand to go in. And you see that little recess that I did there on the bottom side when we cut out the shield itself. What I'm doing is I'm slowly raising the blade up until it comes into that recess. You want to have that recess on the one side if you're going to do it this way. And what that does is when you cut these out like that, it gives you a little bit of a bevel. So when you cut that out, my front side and my back side are actually going to have a bevel. It gives it a little bit different look and a different feel. Feels like your hand has a little bit more space in there if both sides are beveled. But we still need the material to be able to attach this shield boss to the front. So I mark the holes for the shield boss, and I pre-drill some holes. The holes where the handle is, I drill those all the way through. The other ones, I just drill them down just about 1/4 of an inch. The nails that we use to attach the shield boss are hand-forged nails. The ones that go through the shield and through the handle start out as a 2-inch nail, and I trim those to size. And the ones that go strictly on the face, those are a 1/2 inch long. Here we're sanding everything smooth and taking care of any of our glue squeeze out from the handle. This is the rough grit sanding right here. I'll move to a finer grit to finish it off. Yeah, the power tools aren't going to get everywhere, so you're going to have to use some elbow grease and actually take the sandpaper and get into those nooks and crannies if you're going to make the whole thing look consistent. So keep that in mind. So once we have the back all sanded, we'll give it a good cleaning, and then we apply some boiled linseed oil. Linseed oil is just an extract from the flax plant, and it's actually the basis of the paint that goes on the front of the shield. And the linen itself is made from flax as well. So we know that this was a material that they had available to them, and it provides some protection to the back from water damage, and just helps to bring out the grain as well. So it's a good thing for us to use. Here we only cover the back of the shield and the part within the handle that is going to be exposed. You don't want to cover the face of the shield with that, or your canvas isn't going to stick. Here I'm working on a template where I'm going to electronically etch some runes onto the shield boss of this particular shield. Just gives me the Old Norse word for fate. This shield's title is Fate, and it's a little accent that I get to do onto the steel itself. So you'll see that here in a minute. But I cut my templates out of some vinyl, so that it gives me a framework to be able to apply that etching. Here you see me getting set up for that etching. It's fairly simple. That's a lawn tractor battery that I'm going to use, and you'll see a closer view of it here in a moment. So to do the etch, you hook up one side to the positive side. So the positive side goes to the material, and the negative side we wrap in a cotton cloth that I have a vinegar and salt mixture soaked into. And then you apply that to the open space on the template. And it's going to smell funny. But you'll see the metal actually start to bubble away, and you're actually removing microscopic pieces of the metal, and leaving a recess that's going to make the lettering stand out. It's important that you hook the positive side to the piece and wrap the negative side in the cloth. This is going to pull the metal fragments away from the piece rather than pulling it down into the piece. If you do it the other way, your template is not going to be as effective. You'll see some bleeding around the edges of your template. It does take a while to do this too. It takes about 20 minutes to do just those 6 letters. Here I'm marking the rawhide that I'm going to use for the edge of the shield, and this one I'm marking at 3 inches. It's a little wider than I usually do, but I wanted to make sure that I had good coverage with this one, and I had the material, so I went ahead and did it. I don't think it would be uncommon to see a 3-inch edging on these shields. That rawhide, it's kind of like a medieval plastic. You know, they could shape it into whatever shape they wanted, and it becomes really hard and rigid. Provides a lot of strength on that edge, and if they were fighting with swords or something, it would definitely be to their advantage to have that strength on the edge. In fact, it's so hard you can't cut it with scissors. You've got to cut it with a saw or something. It's just the easiest way to do it. You could cut it with scissors, but it's just easier to take it over to the bandsaw and run it through on strips. Then I cut each strip to about 25 inches long. I just square up the ends. The ends are kind of rough. They're still in their natural rawhide state, so I cut that. Once these are cut to size, they go in a bucket of water, and I soak those along with the edge banding material. Here you see the front of the shield. That's the linen that we painted it on. We use a spray adhesive on the shield itself and on the back of the linen, and we just center it. I actually use the cut-off pieces from previous shields to mount and stretch the linen. So once we have it on and centered, you push it down, make sure you have good contact with that contact cement. My camera actually died, so I didn't get a good showing of how that process works. But if you've ever used spray-on contact cement before, it's pretty easy. So we spray the back of the canvas, spray the front of the shield, center it, press it down, and then we cut out around the shield, cut out the handholes. I don't cut the handholes all the way back. I do leave them a little proud. Once I have got all that cut out, I then go and I use essentially a brad, and I poke holes through the canvas where I have my holes drilled. This lets me know where my holes are. Here in a moment, I'll flip the shield back over, and I'm actually going to use an X-Acto knife and remove the canvas material from those holes. I don't want any of those canvas fibers catching on my lacing as I'm trying to pull it through, and pulling the fibers of the linen along with it would really do a lot of damage to the painting that we worked so hard to get onto that canvas. Takes a lot of time to go and do each of those holes individually, and the reason why we don't just use a drill through those holes again is we don't want those linen fibers catching on anything and putting a run in our painting. So it's really important that you actually do this by hand. So here I'm getting ready to set that shield boss. And of course we're using those holes that we pre-drilled earlier. So I typically set the smaller nails first. This just helps to keep it stable on there. And then I make sure that it's set in the right location. Then I come back and I put the larger nails in it as well. Once that's on, we move to the edge banding. So what's in my hand right there is that rawhide, and I'm going to attach it using a rawhide lace as well. And as you can see, the rawhide itself is just kind of flopping around there. And once you get it wet, it becomes very malleable, and you can shape it around that shield very easily. But as it dries, it constricts again And so as you pull that tight through there, and it dries, it's actually going to pull that shield back ever so slightly and give you that really convex front of the shield. If we didn't remove some of the material off of the front, and say we remove that material off of the back side of the shield, we would get a concaved front. So it's really important that you remove that material from the front of the shield to get that nice rounded look. And here I'm using a stitch that just goes right around the edge banding. It's following the contour of the edge of that shield, and it is actually punched through the rawhide itself. I go and I punch each hole in the rawhide and lace it through. And when you tighten up the laces, it conforms to that shape. So you really only have about 45 minutes to an hour of viable workability with that rawhide before it starts getting dry enough where it's not so malleable. So I have 4 different pieces that are about 25 inches long that I work through, and I just work it right around the shield. I try to use one consistent piece of lace, so I do soak that in a bucket of water occasionally as I'm doing this, just as I'm setting up the next piece, to keep it moist enough to be able to work with as well. So to finish it off, that rawhide is really going to take whatever shape you put it into. So I do about 5 or 6 wraps around the back side of the first loop that I put in the shield. And once it's dry, that's going to stay there really well, and be very firm. So then I apply the final 2 nails, and I've pre-drilled those as well. Those 2 nails are what helps hold that handle in place also. Once that's done, I move on to the handle, and I'm using essentially 2 pieces of leather strip and doing a 4-plait braid, kind of like what whip makers use, around that handle to give it a little bit of a decorative look. And then finally, I'll continue the braid on down to make a longer cord that we then put a buckle on the back of, so that we can have a strap for the shield as well. You saw me using our branding iron there. We brand the shields. This one I branded behind the handle. I also sign it as the artist of the shield. It's all signed behind that handle braiding as well. We don't want our name to be on the a prominent feature of the shield of someone that someone buys, but we certainly take pride in what we do and want to make sure that if anyone really takes notice of it, that we make our mark on it. So again, that's a lot of time put into one of these shields, and I hope you can appreciate the workmanship that we put behind these and all the effort we put into making them as nice of a product as we can for our customers. We really take it as an art form, and we hope you can appreciate that as well. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to working with you in the future.